without much further ado, we have quite an exciting program for you, which will consist of the first part. Will focus on the government panel and the future of blockchain seen from the policymakers' perspective. And can I please invite on stage Mr. Pierre Marro, who's the team leader of Fintech Blockchain, Access to Finance at the European Commission DG Connect. Very, very happy to have you. Thank you for coming. We're also very privileged to have Mr. Dirk Bullmann, who's a Fintech coordinator and advisor to the Director General of the European Central Bank. Thank you for coming, sir. Thank you for joining us. I'd also like to call upon Mr. Vlad Radysh. He's the Government Relations Director at Bitfury Group. Thank you for coming, sir. And I'd like to invite on stage Mrs. Siân Jones. She is a founder of European Digital Currency and Blockchain Technology Forum at COINsult. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for coming. Also, my good dear friend, Dr. Atif Ansar. Thank you for making the journey all the way from the British Isles. Atif is a dear friend, but also he's a foundation board. He's a director at Saïd Business School, University of Oxford, my alma mater, and now very much focused on artificial intelligence and blockchain, also a visiting fellow at Stanford. So very, very happy to have you. Thank you, thank you. Also, we are fortunate to have Mrs. Layla Dong. She's a foundation board member at the World Economic Forum, Global Shapers Community. I believe straight from Davos, right? We also have some snow here for you. As you know, yesterday, in fact, we have a whole airplane full of guests who just came from Davos, World Economic Forum, and I believe blockchain is the talk of the year, right? So very happy to have you. Thank you. And I'm your moderator, Mr. Paulius Kunčinas. I'd like to today basically focus on the question of the government role in this industry. And I have a number of questions which I've prepared for all of you. But perhaps, if you don't mind, I would like to address this first question to Mr. Pierre Marro from the Commission. And my impression, I spend a lot of time in Belgium and Brussels, is that the Commission has a very constructive view of the blockchain center and has been monitoring developments for last 3 or more years and has already a project up and running, its own blockchain lab. But I think the big challenge is what the industry is expecting in this year is the regulation of digital currency. And of course, it's a sensitive issue for the industry, for us, Lithuania, because we were heavily involved last year. And we're looking for some leadership in this discussion and to understand which way the conversation is going. So perhaps, without further ado, I'd like to ask to give us an update on the latest thinking within the Commission on this.
Yes, thank you. Is it working?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I mean, it's really a pleasure for me to be here in this first blockchain center. And in a way, it's the first concretization of also policies that we have that we are developing at EU level, which is what was said already. Is that we see blockchain as a major breakthrough, and it's a fantastic opportunity for European players to build new businesses, to innovate, to create new type of value, to change the way those values are created and shared. And so the first, I would say, policy angle in particular for me, who is working for the more from the innovation approach, I would say, is indeed that for Europe it's tremendously important that we seize all the opportunity introduced by blockchain. For that, indeed, we have started different action, and we are now working with different services within the Commission in order to shape a coherent strategy for it. But what we have started already to do, and it will be announced next week by Commissioner Maria Gabriel in charge of digital economy and society, is a new blockchain observatory and forum, which will be for us a tool in order to monitor all the new development, key development happening here in Europe, but also worldwide, and also to analyze what are the trends, what are the implications, and also it's important to stress it. It will be a forum, which means not only something to observe, but also to help for dialogue with all the stakeholders. And a way also to advance reflection at EU level or with different EU players about, okay, what are the implications, what are the issues, how we should move in order to fix those issues. It could be through regulation, it could be through other approach, but this tool would be important for us. Another type of activities is indeed, as you say, since more than 3 years now, we found already a collaborative project for blockchain through the program Horizon 2020, which is our program for supporting research innovation. And the question could be at the time of where there are so impressive investments which are done through ICO, why the Commission should spend money, but I think that the added value for those type of projects is that it's project which enable to bring different partners together. So it's not only to innovate, but it's also to help other partners to prepare for the uptake of this innovation or to contribute. So I think it's something which is important, which has started already. We have already more than around 20 projects supported at EU level, and this funding will increase in the coming years and probably under the next what we call financial perspective, so beyond 2021. And we expect it could be up to 300 million that will be spent for projects that concern blockchain in the next 3 years. We work also on standardization. There is an active discussion with standardization body at the ISO level. I mean, Siân is also involved in those type of activities, so she can tell more about that. But so we actively participate in the standardization effort. I mean, we also going to investigate what could be an infrastructure of public services based on blockchain. This is something that we will launch a study very soon this year about that. And about your question on regulation, this is actually a more difficult one for me. There are two things that I can say. First, we are conscious that in order to enable blockchain to flourish, or blockchain-based innovation and company developing those solutions to flourish and to be successful in Europe or globally, but from Europe, we need to move towards more legal certainty. And I think 2018 will be a year where we will reinforce the dialogue in order to move towards this legal certainty. It doesn't mean that we are going to regulate or to announce a specific regulation this year. This I cannot commit about that. But I can tell you that there will be probably within the Commission, but also with other institutions, with the support of the Parliament and the leader for promoting blockchain in the Parliament, but also for other institutions like the European Central Bank, there will be more and more intense discussion about how to move to a more legal certainty. About the case of cryptocurrency, there is no plan for regulation on cryptocurrency as far as I know today, but I think that we are also, with all the institutions, monitoring more and more closely about what is happening and to anticipate what should, how the thing should be dealt with at European level.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pierre. So if I correctly understand, the main focus will be to harness the blockchain technology for innovation sector and help innovation companies to basically use this. And on regulation, we're still open-ended, still discussion continues. Right. I'd like to, if I may, bring in Mr. Dirk Bullmann from European Central Bank, one of the key stakeholders, I would say, in this discussion. We are, as you know, one of the reasons why the fintech industry and Lithuania has become so prominent is because of our central bank. We have to give them credit for being proactive, engaging, and we have, as a lot of you know here, they're launching the new sandbox, blockchain sandbox in 2019, next year. And I wonder, but the ECB's perspective on this, because it is a very much ongoing discussion on what are the digital currencies, what is blockchain supposed to work for, and especially in the financial industry. And could you give us as much as you can the state of affairs and what to expect in 2018 on this important issue.
With pleasure. Thank you.
Sure.
Maybe I should start out from saying that what the ECB does, what the ECB is concerned with, this is liquidity flows. We care about the flow of money, cash, securities, collateral, and we are concerned about the safety and efficiency of these mechanisms. So this is the starting point, and then we ask ourselves, what role could blockchain potentially play in this? Is it possible that blockchain somehow improves the efficiency while not having a negative impact on safety? This is the question we ask ourselves. We ask these questions not so much from a regulatory perspective. This is Brussels. We are Frankfurt. We have 3 different roles in the. We have to draw the dividing line there. We have 3 different roles in the field of market infrastructure services, of liquidity mechanisms and liquidity flow. One is the operator. We operate services ourselves. So we have to ask ourselves the question, can blockchain play a role in our own services? We operate 2 of the world's largest market infrastructure services in the world in the field of cash payments. It's Target 2, Target Securities, if you're familiar with that, in the field of security settlement. So the question is, can we use these new technologies? At this stage, we have said that the technology is not yet ready for prime time because we are speaking about mass adoption. We are speaking about a service that is the backbone of the financial sector, and we cannot easily then replace this by a technology which is still relatively new. But we are exploring this, and we also have established a test lab inside the ECB. We are cooperating inside the community of central banks in Europe, and we also have joined forces with Bank of Japan, for example, our famous project Stella. So if you go to the ECB website and put Stella there, then you'll see what we are doing with the Bank of Japan, that we really explore whether efficiency and safety requirements could be met if you put, for example, a payment mechanism on DLT. I suppose the operator role. The second role is Catalyst. Catalyst is European integration. Now we have to foster European integration, and we also have to ask ourselves whether blockchain can help or whether it could hinder maybe the European integration process. Here we have established a group with market participants, and we are exploring this. The interoperability question comes into play here, the question whether some barriers which are in existence for more than almost 2 decades, I should say, whether they can be finally abolished with the help of blockchain. This is what we are also exploring. Then the third role, which is maybe closer to Brussels, is that we oversee market infrastructure service. We oversee the mechanisms which we operate ourselves, but also in the market. And then we have to ask ourselves whether these the assessment frameworks are still fit for purpose, whether they are sufficiently agnostic to the underlying technology, that we don't stifle innovation. So these are the 3 roles and the 3 approaches we're having. And the most active role we are playing at the moment is in the field of the test lab, where we really do experimental work and get hands-on experience with new technologies.
Thank you, Mr. Bullmann, for very frank remarks. I appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. By the way, we'll have a chance to ask follow-up questions. But perhaps I'd like to change the focus a little bit and talk from the demand side, if I may, Ms. Radysh. Where do you see in 2018, where is the demand coming from for blockchain technology, especially in the public domain, if I may? Sorry. Okay.
So maybe I could just address one comment to your earlier questions, because I think they're very closely related. One of the demands of industry, if we can call it that, the private sector, is something which Pierre mentioned, which is legal certainty, regulatory certainty. It's very difficult for any business to be able to operate effectively if it doesn't know what the legal environment is, and particularly in areas where it touches traditional sectors that are already regulated. So understanding where the boundaries are, what you can and can't do, will helps innovators address their new markets. Now, I should explain now that I work also for the Gibraltar Financial Services Commission, and indeed you very kindly invited our Minister for Commerce, Minister Isola, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, and so he asked me to address some comments on this. But as a European jurisdiction, we've certainly been very sensitive to the needs of the private sector in terms of obtaining that regulatory certainty, and we've also been conscious of the needs of consumers to be able to deal with confidence with businesses in the sector, and also the financial supply chain, banks providing banking facilities to have confidence to deal with these businesses, because that is still a significant challenge. And so I think when we're looking at regulation, we're not just looking at the not just at the area of focus that we most commonly hear about, which is around anti-money laundering and countering terrorist finance, but also the need to provide prudential and conduct regulation in order to protect consumers, and coincidentally also to protect the jurisdictions in which those businesses operate, because when it's an unregulated space, it's really hard to provide any kind of certainty about whether you're dealing with good businesses or bad businesses. We've certainly addressed that market need for regulatory certainty from both supply side and from demand side by providing a regulatory framework. And indeed we have our DLT regulations that came into force on the 1st of January this year to try and provide that regulatory certainty, certainly in areas where customers are entrusting their assets or their value in the hands of others who are using the technology. We also see the role in that of helping to support the use of the technology, especially as a means of venture financing. And I think all of that feeds then into where the demand is. The spectrum of demand is, of course, broad. You've got the traditional payment sectors. Clearly, some of the goals of the earlier idealistic goals of Bitcoin and blockchain as a means of democratizing payment have yet to be properly appreciated, yet alone realized. But certainly the traditional actors are already exploring the use of the technology, and so we see banks and financial institutions looking to the technology to assist in providing greater efficiency around clearing and settlement, as well as many other back office functions. We're seeing demand from the public sector, from government itself, including our own in Gibraltar, but we're certainly not unique in that, looking to find ways in which the technology can instill trust between government and the state and its citizens. And we're also seeing tremendous novelty in developing new products and services. So we often hear about the disruptive impact on existing products and services, but actually what we're finding now is whole new products and services that did not exist before, and finding that this technology, DLT, is able to help them.
I would agree with you. I think one of the most exciting things that I witnessed here in Lithuania is the sheer explosion of creativity and new ideas last year that we saw thanks to blockchain technology. It's probably one of the most powerful driving forces behind innovation right now in Lithuania. And of course, also what I found very encouraging is that nearly every ministry in Lithuania has its own blockchain project. They're just operating quietly in a sort of silo environment, and hopefully through Blockchain Center we will bring them all here to network, exchange ideas and good practice. Now moving on, I'm very pleased to have Dr. Atif Ansar from Saïd Business School, representing University of Oxford. And you, Atif, you see a lot of executives coming through your programs. You travel a lot in the US. I think one of the interesting points you raised, that blockchain doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's all other technologies also, like artificial intelligence. There's a lot of work going on in DNA, and medical industry is very interested in using blockchain, for instance. So I wonder where you see what's the direction of travel in terms of where do you see convergence with other technologies, and how can blockchain add value in those?
It's an excellent question, Paulius. First of all, I'm thrilled to be in Vilnius and Lithuania. Lithuania obviously has an incredibly innovative and talented population. It's very tech savvy. So coming from the third world of the British Isles, I am delighted to be here, and there's much to learn from the advances being made in Lithuania and bring them back to the UK. Lithuania is also a great sandbox, really, because of its highly innovative small population. Things that work here can scale very quickly across Europe and rest of the world. So I think there's tremendous enthusiasm in observing how these technologies develop here. The question you asked, Paulius, is how are people in decision-making authority, executives in large companies in big public sector viewing blockchain and sort of toolkit of technologies? And a lot of my work is on mega projects, $1 billion plus investments. And that pulls me into a lot of consulting work with CFOs. And whilst I work on capital allocation decisions with them, they begin asking questions about how do I use AI, how do I use blockchain, and a toolkit of technologies to support a huge range of issues that keep CFOs up at night. Be it procurement, be it making payments, be it contracting, tendering, settling invoices, double entry accounting. So the whole range of issues they face. Now, what's emerging from my research is executives are largely technology agnostic. What they want is their pain to go away. So kind of the provocation to many entrepreneurs in the room today is focus on the end user's pain points and then come up with a toolkit that can help solve it. Now, blockchain is very promising as an underlying tool for that. Allow me to give you an example. The UK makes £170 billion worth of welfare payments each year as a government to its citizens. It costs over £50 million to process these payments, and it takes 3 to 4 days, if not more, for the recipients to receive their welfare checks. Now, from a government perspective, it's costly, slow, it's administratively very cumbersome. From a citizen perspective, these are people in great need. They can't wait 3-4 days for their benefits to arrive in their accounts. And they too have to incur costs on their end. Blockchain can obviously, and many innovations have already shown this, can resolve this problem quite easily. So as one application, it can make this problem go away. Similarly, in the UK, we tried to institute a national identity card many years ago. It ended up in a complete fiasco, like many things typically tend to in the UK, I'm afraid.
Like a referendum.
That fiasco of a national identity card could now be revisited in light of technological advancements that blockchain has enabled, which could also include a degree of AI in them. So in a way, the technologies lend themselves to being blended in creative ways to solve real-world problems. I would support my colleague's proposition. Government-to-citizen relationships require a level of security, stability, interoperability that demand blockchain-type solutions. So we've seen the rise of social networks. Almost all social networks are peer-to-peer. There's hardly any social networks that are government-to-citizen. With blockchain, we can now change that narrative and begin creating highly secure ways of dealing between governments and citizens, be it issuing you a land registry or your passport, your healthcare record, etc., etc. It sort of creates a platform to run multiple applications. So I see tremendous future in that. My sense is to scale to that future requires experimenting with individual apps in a very tight lab-controlled fashion, and then exposing them to increasing levels of uncertainty, so that they can scale through that.
Thank you, Atif. So the message is to focus on what keeps CFOs up at night and addressing their pain. But presumably it means it has to be, one of my understandings of blockchain, it has to be recurrent pain. It's blockchain is at its best when you're addressing a process that's simple, that usually recurs all the time, that's easily to predict, and therefore you create a decentralized way of creating efficiency. But it's a nightmare for situations that require discretion.
Yes.
And if it's a highly sort of a fluid situation, it is difficult. So sometimes I get the message from the industry, you cannot put everything on blockchain.
Yeah.
There are still processes that require human interference and decision making. Layla, if I may bring you in on this discussion, I remember actually Professor Klaus Schwab was in Vilnius a few months ago, and he made a very few astute remarks, and one of them is obviously that Lithuania has to get ready for Industry 4, right? The fourth industrial revolution, and that's something that was a wake-up call for us all of here to really start focusing. And I wonder, in the traditional industry, where do you see synergies, and how can traditional exporters, because Lithuania is an exporting country, producing food, furniture, electronics, how can they take advantage of blockchain, in your view?
So we just arrived this morning from Davos, and there's no doubt the most popular topic this year in Davos is blockchain. No matter it's in the conference center or just on the street, you can just hear the word blockchain, cryptocurrency. So everybody is talking about it. That's very exciting. And I have the privilege to talk to a lot of entrepreneurs from the traditional industry, including the founder of WPP, Sir Martin himself. And we've been discussing, how blockchain can bring the advertising industry to the next level. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that the traditional industry can actually, bring their business model to the next level through blockchain. But the problem here is, for those big enterprise, they're too conservative, and the business too big. It's difficult for them, to turn as startup companies. So there's a lot of education programs going on within the enterprise, and there's also they trying to do investment into particular projects which is related to their traditional industry. I can give you an example, Alibaba, like everybody knows, is the biggest e-commerce enterprise in China. And they actually found their blockchain lab last year in April. So it's the first blockchain lab in China. And follow Alibaba, all the big companies in China these days, they want to do something with blockchain. We call it the 11th of January, the day of blockchain in China, because in that particular day, more than 30 public companies make their press release, and they all saying, we're going to do something with blockchain. And the share price all went up, 15 to 20% average. But there's bring another challenge is they don't have the team, they don't have the talents who can develop the technology. So I think Blockchain Center will be a wonderful platform, for us to connect our blockchain talents to traditional industry and also to government, so everybody can communicate, can learn. Just like the World Economic Forum, will welcome politicians, no matter is like President Trump or our President Xi Jinping, as long as you're willing to open a discussion to communicate, you all be welcomed in Blockchain Center. And I think Blockchain Center has been so grateful in terms of how to educate the public to understand the technology. So have some very great results in Australia. So in terms of regulations, I think Australia government is one of the most open-minded government to embrace the technology. We really hope our blockchain center can be the bridge, to connect everybody and make the regulators know more about the technology, so they when they make decisions, they can make the right decision.
Thank you, Layla. Before I open the floor to questions from the audience, I can't resist asking you one question and a follow-up. Is we have to be honest that this they will face a lot of competition here in Lithuania. And I hear that some clients are going to Estonia, which annoys me very much. I don't want to hear about digital country Estonia anymore. And of course, Gibraltar is making great advances. We have Switzerland, we have Scandinavia. So we're not alone in this, and there's a healthy competition. And a question from outside, for guests who are here. What do you think are our strengths and of course, what are our weaknesses? How can we be better, more attractive to clients from Asia, from clients from Australia, from UK and the world? What can we do even better, do you think?
So I come from a consulting background. So for the past few years, I've been helping my clients to achieve their globalization agenda. Also, to help them to deal with government relations that can be a little bit difficult or challenging in China, especially. So I think the best way for an industry to grow, no matter it's within your country or globally, there's 3 key points. One is always working the government, get the support from the government. I think globally speaking, China's One Belt, One Road initiative can be really related to fourth industrial revolution. So our President Xi Jinping actually mentioned last year at the One Belt, One Road Open Forum that One Belt, One Road is not only about building infrastructures, it's not only about exporting goods and services. It's actually we together building up a road of innovation. So I highly recommend, Lithuanian delegations go to Beijing, talk to our Ministry of Information and Technology, to collaborate together. The second point is public recognition. So we need education. The best way for regulators to make right decision is actually when the people in this country, they understand the technology. If we look at China, why we have to separate blockchain technology and cryptocurrency is separate? Because the public, they don't understand the difference. They can't see the risks from those bad projects. So if everybody understands this technology, I think we should all open-minded, the government will be very, very support. So the third point is the support and the social impact from those big enterprise. So I'm so happy to see we have a lot of great big companies already in partnership with our blockchain center. I think that's a very good start. So really looking forward to working with everybody.
Thank you, Layla. Sure. And then I'll be looking for questions from the audience after one follow-up. Yeah.
Just a really short point, but I don't think we should be using the word competition and blockchain in the same sentence. I think we should be using collaboration and blockchain in the same sentence.
Very nice. On that note, can I have questions from the audience or remarks or observations, please? I'm looking for... Yes, Mr. Sorin.
Yes, Sorin Moisa, member of the European Parliament, who
Thank
has
you.
been following this issue for a while now. I would like to add to what the colleague from the Commission and the colleagues from the Commission and the ECB mentioned on the regulatory space. There is a very, and I think you have touched on it for a bit, but I think this is really momentous. It's very important, and it couldn't be stressed enough. In December, or the 15th of December, there was an agreement. It's political. Now the lawyers are working on sort of spelling it out in legal articles between the three institutions, Parliament, Council, and Commission, on amending the existing anti-money laundering regime in order to integrate cryptocurrencies and the whole ecosystem around cryptocurrencies into it. From now on, once we have legislation, it will be a directive. It will need to be transposed by member states. But, for instance, an exchange or a broker of cryptocurrencies will have to register, will have to have proper procedures, KYC, know your customer, will have to do enhanced screening of clients who are suspicious for whatever reason. This is truly momentous, because I know, for instance, of many exchanges and brokers, smaller entities who have huge issues working with banks because the business is unregulated in terms of know your customer and money laundering and so on. So this is really helping a lot. It's not regulating cryptocurrencies as such, of course, but it is allowing them into the mainstream. It is civilizing the space. It is bringing light and coherence and predictability to this space. And it will allow for a more plural market, where more players will come into it. Obviously, there's more competition, there's more transparency. It will be better for all. So I would almost equate this to a type of official recognition, once it really formally comes into the official Gazette of the European Union, of the cryptocurrency space and everything that is linked to it, and of the technology itself. And I agree that, of course, we need to distinguish. There are still crooks and imposters out there, but there are also many respectable projects which do use cryptocurrency as well. So this is not about gambling. I hear a lot of rubbish, also even in the Financial Times, comparing this to pure gambling and so on. So we do need to separate the imposters and the crooks and things that are not okay from legitimate business and legitimate projects. And I think this compromise that we have reached in Brussels is momentous in this regard. Thank you.
I think it says a lot when the CEO of one of the biggest financial institutions, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, apologizes in the Financial Times for incorrectly likening cryptocurrencies to illegal activities. And I remember the discussion we had at the Parliament when you famously said that these currencies are here to stay. So we better talk about it and to reach, as you said, a normal situation. Looking for further comments, questions, please.
Hello.
Addressed to the panel, please.
Yeah. Hello, here in the back.
Sorry.
I'm Raffaele Ciriello. I'm an assistant professor at the European Blockchain Center in Copenhagen.
Welcome.
And you were concluding with the nice remarks that you should see this as an opportunity for collaboration, not competition. So my simple question is, how can we collaborate? Where do you see the focus areas of the Blockchain Center in Vilnius in terms of research? Of course, we have been very active in various areas such as logistics, finance, public administration, social networks, and so on. What is the position of the Blockchain Center Vilnius?
Okay, maybe I'll take that question. Well, first of all, we recognize this is a very nice physical space, this building, but the reality of the world is that we live in these. That's where we spend most of our time, and our mental space is online. What we want. The genuine power is the network. I mean, the reason we're so delighted to be working with Melbourne and Shanghai is that we believe this is going to be a powerful network, and we want to. And the most important thing that I learned is that, there is the blockchain technology was supposed to create trust amongst strangers, instant trust, which is so hard to come by these days. And the technology is supposed to be, but the people behind the technology are still not willing to trust each other. And there's a lot of silo mentality. Even I see it here in Lithuania. They're doing things, but quietly. They don't want to share. And the way we want to break through this barrier is by having open conversations, discussions, exchange, at risk of even leaking our intellectual property, startup ideas. I think this is a movement that is so much bigger and better than all of us. And I think the simple step forward is to have open channels of communication. We want to promote our group. We have a blockchain center Telegram. We have a lot of people there. You're all welcome to join us. And we have a constant ongoing conversation. Every single day we're exchanging ideas, photos. We're encouraging each other, because sometimes it's a lonely battle. Sometimes it's difficult to be inspired because you are facing a lot of resistance. But I think we're doing a reasonably good job, and thank you for leading us in this direction.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Perhaps
thank you very
let me
much.
add, so another idea around collaboration is a lot of blockchain startups will face a scaling problem. So they'll be able to get a degree of angel or venture funding, particularly if they've got an interesting idea, and they'll be able to bootstrap them and get them going for a couple of years. But then they face a classic problem of valley of death. So there's a lot of capital available at the early stages and a lot of capital available for very, very large companies. Very little capital available for pure scale-ups. And crossing that chasm can be deadly for far majority of scale-ups. So I think my suggestion would be to think very carefully about how you're going to catapult yourself from an early stage company to a proper scale-up company. My sense is a lot of entrepreneurs enter the startup space in order to change the world. Along the way, they become greedy, and they end up neither rich nor changing the world. Right? So commit to one or the other. So a lot of blockchain apps will launch with the desire to become the Facebooks of their industry. It ain't going to happen. So, just basically partner up when you arrive at that chasm of catapulting yourself to, and essentially share IP. Don't be greedy. Figure out mechanisms to be open about your patents. Otherwise, it's a very difficult journey.
As they say in Asia, sharing is caring, right? Yeah. and indeed, sure.
Once again, I'm going to have to apologize for my little interjections, but I think you mentioned the magic word patent a moment ago, and I'd like to dwell on that for just a second. What we are starting to see, and we've seen this trend in the last 18 months or so, is an incredible rise in the number of patents in this particular sector. Purely by chance, I've done work with the EU Intellectual Property Office, and some studies have been carried out that have shown that there's the early signs of patent trolling, patent grabbing. And that is a real challenge in a blockchain space, which is an open source space largely. And it's an issue, I think, that needs to be addressed. If it isn't addressed, we'll find that the brilliant entrepreneurs and innovators will find themselves shackled by the very large corporations that are just hoarding patents wherever they can, and that isn't what blockchain is about.
And I suppose for our jurisdiction, as protecting the intellectual property and IP is going to be one of the big challenges and necessities. I'm looking for another question. We have still a few more minutes. Maybe questions to our panelists.
Sorry, can I?
Thank you, panel. My name is Jeremy Samuel. I'm actually in Europe working on an Australian crypto startup. So I've just been talking to banks in Zurich, banks in Valletta. Malta hasn't been mentioned, but it's also a terrific jurisdiction, along with Gibraltar and many of the others. The challenge I see, everything that I'm hearing the panel say is fantastic and so exciting and inspiring for somebody trying to start up in the space. But on the other hand, I've spent the last 2 weeks talking to bankers and lawyers telling me you can't have a bank account that takes money to and from an exchange. We won't let you interact in this way or that way with client resources. You're going to have to regulate this part of you as a security. We're going to bury you in 10 feet of paperwork to allow you to do the other. So I guess I wonder what kind of situation, what kind of role you see potentially, and I mean, my journey in all of this, I should say, really started out under the inspiration of the Blockchain Center in Melbourne, so I'm very excited to be here for this opening. I think it's fantastic, and congratulations to Sam and everybody who's been involved in it, and Martin, and but the question is, in the enthusiasm, my enthusiasm, I assume the enthusiasm of most of the people in this room, how do we overcome the banks, the lawyers, etc., before they kind of strangle us?
Let's rise against banks and lawyers. We do need them at the end of the day. That's most of the monetary resources still kept. Perhaps could we ask one of you to take this question about how we coexist with conservative traditional banks and lawyers, and how do we make this work? Sorry. Yes, thank you.
I mean, here again, I think that, well, first, I have not the magic recipe for the current situation, and I think it's more about every entrepreneur, I mean, to be convincing and also to be transparent about what is done and to do things in a way which is in agreement with some key principles that Siân could maybe develop what is done in Gibraltar, which is based on this approach. Then I think it will be as part of we move towards this legal certainty, and many thanks for having reminded that at EU level we have also made progress through the amendment of the fourth anti-money directive, which now recognize the necessity to make know your customer action, and it will help to I mean, to provide more confidence, more trust, also for players like banks in this type of activities. So I think it will be step by step. It could be by issuing guidelines. It should be maybe by adopting piece of technology that helps to make this confidence. But then I cannot commit for the bankers or the lawyer myself. So.
Yeah. Sorry, sure.
Okay. Yeah, colleagues. This is really interesting question, because we met this question many times trying to implement projects in the government. So our company successfully finalized 3 projects, 2 in Ukraine and 1 in Georgia. But of course, it's always the problem of trust. And I just want to remind to all of us that blockchain, the nature of blockchain is the digital trust. So if we have problems with the old world, we have engaged old world to the new digital trust. And believe me, it's possible to do. So we met such challenges during the development of the projects and overcome them, because we faced the new instruments of interactions between government and citizens, between the government employees inside the government organization. So really, if the representatives of government or banks or legal authorities, so they really should understand the basics of this technology and the basement of the digital trust. It will help to overcome all these difficulties.
Thank you. Sure.
I'm leaving a bit maybe here the central bank territory, but what I think could be the magic word is really sandboxing. That you mentioned the Central Bank of Lithuania offering this. I know about other central banks doing this, national regulators doing this, but there's no level playing field. There's competition between the central banks, between the countries in the euro area, which is maybe suboptimal, and something that would potentially be overcome. But this is nothing we, as a central bank, could really address, because it's a national competence at the moment. And if something needs to be changed or should be changed, it's up to the European bodies to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to build on that and just say, find yourself an anchor customer. So find a conservative, traditional, incumbent, slow player, be a government department, a boring large company, and essentially attach yourself to them on the very edge. They get the concept. They have no idea what to do with it, and help them solve a very specific problem. Be very frugal in the problem you choose to solve, and then very gradually use that to expand. It's sort of a symbiotic, develop a symbiotic relationship with a much larger player. And once you solve that problem for that anchor customer, you're ready for a broader market.
Thank you for that advice.
I can only share a little experience and hopefully help you here in Lithuania and elsewhere think about how to approach this problem, because the lack of availability of everyday banking, operational banking services is a definite choke point, and it's been a choke point in this sector for a long time. I come back to what I was saying earlier on about regulatory certainty. The problem for commercial bankers is that regulators, oh dear, I'm one of them, hit them over the head rather hard and penalise them when they make mistakes, particularly in the area of anti-money laundering and countering terrorist financing rules. And it's really difficult for a commercial bank to understand how to take the risk. The risk is a regulatory risk, not a risk of the business or that wants to do business with it. But the regulatory risk, how to match what it knows about dealing with traditional business in terms of anti-money laundering with this new world that it's grappling to understand and that's changing every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. And it's a real challenge. Mm-hmm. And so I think my tip for policymakers and legislators is when you start legislating and regulating, focus on the stuff which is supportive rather than the stuff which is stifling, because that actually gives confidence to bankers. So if you provide, for example, our example would be where we provided a licensing regime in Gibraltar, that was designed to give confidence to the financial supply chain, to banks, to be able to do business with customers in the sector. And then to bankers, you want to bring them along that regulatory journey. Explain to them why you're doing what you're doing in bringing in regulation and certainty, and explain to them how that might help them. You can't tell them what to do. You can't tell a commercial bank that it should or shouldn't take a particular risk that may or may not be within its appetite. What you can do is give it the comfort that you're providing the environment. And my tip here is really to policymakers and legislators to be progressive with your legislation and regulation to help support industry safely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We just have enough time for a couple more questions.
Hi, one question for the panel. I'm Vlad from co-founded from Slovenia. We've been evaluating up to 100 blockchain companies per month last year, and now we're going into investing, and we have a platform and advisory. And first of all, congratulations on laying such a beautiful foundation for blockchain companies and startups and partnerships in particular. My question for the panel is connected with what do you think about private versus public blockchains? Because we in Slovenia have started talking to also large companies, and the government in particular is very cooperative. And we see that there's a discrepancy between the public blockchain and what it can do, how fast it can scale, built on Ethereum for now and smart contracts, versus private blockchains being developed for large companies. How you see these two evolving and perhaps cooperating in the future? Thanks.
Who would like to take this? Sure.
So again, from my work with CFOs, I think private blockchains are inevitable, simply because if you're a big pharma company, you want to ensure security of your ingredients, and there's, say, 80 different ingredients going into one drug. That can't go on 100 million public computers, no matter how much you trust that, you know. So you're going to develop your duplicative infrastructure. It's inevitable. Similarly with payments, with invoicing, etc., etc. So it's no bad thing. It's a way of solving the solution. My sense is, it's just conceptually, I see blockchain as a closed form TCP/IP. It's a way of rewiring the internet in a much more secure way, within, you know, records are not easily tampered with, in order to have a lot more control over security and identity of people you're transacting with. So the public blockchain is very helpful for trust among complete strangers, but private blockchain is simply to make sure that the person you're dealing with, particularly on an iterative basis, is the same person since the last transaction. So I think private blockchains are spawning, and they will happen. I'm not sure where and how the private and the public will interact, but I think it's just simply an alternative form of the internet, an alternative structure of the internet that's emerging alongside a much more open but less secure internet we already have.
But that does raise one question. If the whole point was decentralization, transparency, and if you start moving too far to private blockchain, how does it actually differ from, let's say, Microsoft Enterprise or SAP or Oracle or other kind of applications that companies run? What's the edge?
So I think the edge, in my view, and again there'll be lots of views on this, is simply having a stable identity, a trusted, stable identity. So, an example, Lithuania has very successfully introduced the national healthcare records, and it's been one of the few countries that's managed to do that. Again, another fiasco in the UK. We spent £12.1 billion and got nothing for it. Right? So, and the difficulty there is citizens demand tremendous privacy around their medical health records. Now, on traditional enterprise systems, that degree of security of data, or privacy of data, and stability, anonymized stability of identity, is very difficult to achieve. Okay. Whereas blockchain can enable efficiency, stability of identity and security simultaneously. It's almost a holy grail it can square.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I have another sort of controversial question, if you may. No one has raised this, but obviously one of the fascinating stories of Bitcoin last year is just how much energy was consumed to create that security and trust. In fact, somebody told me China alone was consuming as many terabyte hours as the whole of Iberian Peninsula, meaning Spain and Portugal, and Gibraltar taken together. That's a lot of electricity resources used to create trust. And if just a provocative question, if they take it to a logical conclusion, if the entire world were to run on blockchain and that's what was required, at some point we go bankrupt in terms of having available, or we have to look for new energy resource. So that's another, I guess, question, is it to what extent blockchain is going to become a dominant technology, the way that internet, search, the way that social media really changed the way we interact, the way we do business, the way we communicate. It really changed. And I guess the big question is blockchain going to change that, or is it just going to be just another nice technology to have, but nothing super revolutionary about it? Does anyone want to? What would you like? Are we about to witness a revolution?
When I started to think about blockchain, it was the beginning of 2013, and I started to believe that blockchain is something which could add to internet a lot of new values. And now I feel that blockchain is so important for the world, like internet was in the beginning of 19th. So I'm not sure that from technological perspectives, blockchain will be the same in 5 and 7 years. So the blockchain is just the first step with a lot of beautiful applications over it. But this is the first step. And we can achieve this step number 2, step number 3. But the world, so digitalized, it really needs more deep trust within this digital environment. And I think blockchain is the first step for that. So I believe in blockchain. and I put in my mem, I want to believe, like Mulder from the X-Files. And it's really beautiful technology. It's really beautiful technology with a great future, but it's not the perfect technology because we are living in developing world, and the technology is changing, so we can expect something new, something nice and great in the nearest future.
Or as they say, technology is only as good as the people who use it. Right? So there's the human factor as well.
No, just to add, there are probably better experts than me in the room, but there are also already an evolution of the consensus mechanism, and I think in the interim context they are testing a new one. So, as you have said, I mean, we have seen already several evolution of the blockchain. It will continue to evolve. When we talk about blockchain at the Commission, I mean, we surf a little bit on the wave, but we are thinking about blockchain-inspired technology. So we don't see it as blockchain as we know it through the Bitcoin infrastructure. But we see something that will evolve. And indeed, I mean, in the context of a private blockchain, this question of energy consumption is by far less relevant. But indeed, you're right. I mean, if the future of blockchain is to consume so much energy, it would be a problem, for instance, for the Commission to commit in this infrastructure. While we have we have also other objectives regarding climate change and energy efficiency.
Bring back nuclear power too.
No. To come back to the previous question regarding public or private blockchain, I mean, there is also an issue that we'll have to solve, and for that also we need to interact with all the stakeholders, is in the public blockchain there is also an issue of governance that should be clarified. If we imagine that we put a lot of public services, doesn't mean on public blockchain, but public services on the blockchain, how we can ensure that we'll deliver those services will be sustainable, we can be reliable for the services if we don't solve this governance approach.
Yeah, and that's actually the risk that I'm seeing, that we can also, there's risk of devolving too many processes and delegating responsibility to artificial intelligence could be quite a risky path, taken to a logical conclusion.
May I comment on that briefly?
Yes,
very briefly. Because at the ECB we prefer really the term DLT rather than blockchain, because what we do is not so much looking at the real blockchain, but we looked at Ethereum, but now also increasingly Hyperledger and Corda and this kind of stuff. Because look at the payment system area. In the payment system area today, everything has to be instant. Processing has to be instant. Everything needs to be settled in the blink of an eye. How can you do that with a standard classic blockchain? It doesn't work because of this proof of work mechanism, because the specific arrangement you have with every 10 minutes block is built and so on. So the standard blockchain, I think, conceptually designed as a peer-to-peer payment system, will, I think, in the real world never be used as a payment system, because today I give you an example in the euro system, in the community of central banks in the euro area, we are now building a new instant payment settlement service based on the old-fashioned technology, but we managed to settle within 10 seconds. Compare this to what Bitcoin blockchain can do. I mean, we can do already a lot with existing technology, so we have to find a good DLT in order to improve efficiency here.
Okay, Dandas.
Tadas Langaitis, Member of Parliament here in Lithuania. I have a probably tough question on the roadmap and timeline for expected regulation. $1 million question for many entrepreneurs probably in the room. What would be your expected roadmap and timeline for regulation from different countries, different institutions, from different kind of fields like second commodity regulation, etc.? Any thoughts, I think, could be very valuable for everybody in the room. Thank you.
Okay, can I start as an impartial observer without any agendas? I think there's pressure building in the system to do something about this. I think one positive movement I'm seeing, politically speaking, is the Eurogroup discussion. Macron and Merkel are working on some new roadmap for Euro, and there's a desire for harmonization and tax. And I think I hope that this discussion will come up within that framework, because it is an area that requires harmonization between jurisdictions, as you mentioned earlier, right? We cannot have the situation where we're going to compete again, we already have that situation of asymmetrical jurisdictions on taxes, for instance. And I think in this one area, there is a desire to see convergence. And I think the other source of pressure, it's part of the bigger process of what's happening with the banking sector in Europe. I think because I think blockchain is so heavily used by fintech organizations and new fintech, I think my perspective is that the banks are slowly moving towards taking less risk, functioning more as utilities, and I think the startup capital will be provided more by alternative sources. And this is where there's a big hope for Europe, because I think Europe in general has quite weak capital markets compared to United States, and doesn't have a strong tradition of venture capital. And I think this is the space where blockchain could really make a huge difference. That's my personal view. Not to be attributed to blockchain sin.
Thank you. I think for China, I would say another 2 years, because every country's situation is different. But firstly, as our government mentioned, we are very support for the technology blockchain. Like the Ministry of Technology and Information already built a lot of joint labs with the A-list universities and research centers in China. But on the other hand, for ICOs, so at the moment, our government's opinion is they don't think ICO is necessary. ICO is just a way of fundraising I would say fundraising the money to start this business. But token, however, is necessary, because token is the key to create a new ecosystem, to build up new rules for the game. So I would say give our government another 2 years to learn, and I always welcome, our blockchain center in Shanghai and Suzhou can give blockchain 101 lectures to all the government officials. That's why the blockchain center in Shanghai is actually we got a lot of support from the Shanghai local government. So I think that's a good start. But another 2 years, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Layla. And I think
could I just give a perspective on timeline? So I think I promise the last time I'm going to mention Gibraltar because we're going in a moment. But that's a project that to have our first piece of legislation took 3 years from start to finish. But once we were committed to producing a regulatory framework, it took 12 months from concept, which is a novel outcomes-focused, principles-based concept, to hitting the statute book. And so this is not something that can just be switched on overnight, but it doesn't have to take years. We're currently working on our token regulations, covering ICOs, secondary markets in tokens, and investment advice in tokens, and that will be done in half the time and four times the scope. So it can be done quickly if there's a will and an enlightenment from government and regulator to do that. Unfortunately, within the EU, at EU level, so as I'm not an EU official, I'll pontificate on this. But I think realistically, we're thinking of 3 to 5 years. If you think about the amendments to the 4th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, they were floated exactly 2 years ago this week. So the demands of the Council to the Commission to formulate an action plan relating to terrorist financing, which was the catalyst for this change, that was published exactly 2 years ago this month. And it was the specific proposals were published by the Commission in the summer of that year, and we're now a year and a half down the line before we reach agreement. And I'm not being critical. I'm just saying it is a slow process. No, I know that. Absolutely, I'm not. And if the cryptocurrency part had been detached from the rest, it would have been done a lot sooner. Absolutely agree. But the problem is the machinery the complexity of the machinery of EU legislation, it takes a bit of time, and that's really what I'm. So this wasn't a criticism or an advert for Gibraltar, sure. But another tip for Lithuania: you may need to consider doing some things at national level if you want to really support the initiative of the ecosystem that you're creating here at the Blockchain Center.
Thank you. On this very positive message, I'm afraid we're out of time. We have a second panel where we can continue our discussion. I think you will agree this is a great example of what the Blockchain Center is all about: exchanging information, frank discussions, feedback from, and building collaboration. So I'd like you all to thank the panel for joining us today, and now we continue with we have a short coffee break for 20 minutes,